When it comes to forms, there's a lot of options for different input types. So I'm going to copy and paste this into CodePen, and I'm going to show you all the different types of options here when we are creating our forms within HTML. So we can also go over to mozilla.org, and they have a whole guide of all the different elements that are available within forms. So there's a lot of different HTML elements. We see that we've got button here. So we could also change our HTML form. So we could do it as a button. And we keep type as submit. And then instead of having the value as click me, we could transform that, and button is not a self-closing tag, so we need to create another button, closing button, and essentially it's going to do the exact same thing. So this is depending on what your preference is. There's different options that you can add that in. So we looked at form, and we're going to look at input now, because input is really the bulk of the different types of interactive controls used within forms. And with input, we have a whole bunch of new ones as well. When HTML5 came along, they gave us a whole bunch of new input types. So we've got button that we've looked at, and we've also looked at text earlier. So I wanted to look at some more of the specific ones, such as email. So let's open up our editor, and just going to copy and paste out this section here. And instead of this being first name, we'll do email and label it as email over here. Give it a type. So we're going to give it an ID of email. We're going to give it a name of email. And this, of course, you can, as long as they're matching over here for email and name email, or it should be matching with the ID. So this is where we've got label. So the for email and ID email need to match in order for us to label them together. And when we click on it, then we get that focus there. So we do have an option type as email. And although it's going to look the same, so I'm going to just quickly save this one over. And even though it looks the same as the text type, when we type in something here, and we type in something in the first name, we'll see that we get this little pop-up. So this is something new as well with HTML5, because it allows us to have this pop-up window that shows up that won't allow us to submit the form until it's an actual email address, because it knows, it's smart enough to know that it's expecting an email format, and if it's not provided, then it won't let you submit the form if you call the type email. Another type of common input type would be a radio button. So these are also very commonly used. You're going to see them used quite often, and these are the same way as over here. So I just need to copy out label and input. And now we can label the input buttons, and because they work off of the ID, so we could have a number of radio buttons. We could have one and give it equal to one, and one over here. And over here, the name, so this is going to be, because with radio buttons, the idea is that you probably have more than one. So I'm going to just call it radio for now, and I'm going to show you how this is going to work. So the type of input is going to be a radio button, and we see that that transforms into a radio button. And let's check this out now. So now when I add a second one, and I'm going to do 2, I'm going to tie this one to 2, and this one to 2, so that the label and everything ties together. And I'm going to show you why having the same name and why that works. So when we have the same name, we see that the inputs, we can only click on one. And the idea with the radio button is that you only have the ability to click on one input. So if you click on the second one, then automatically it unclicks the first one. So I'm going to add in a third one, and keep it type radio button, and now you see that it doesn't matter which one I click on, it always unclicks. And we can also see that the type of data that it's sending over is going to only show the value of that selected radio button. So we'll see within the query string So maybe I need to copy this back over into here just to show you what's going to actually be passed through. So when we look at this and we refresh it, now notice that we've got our first name and we've got one of these selections here, and when I click it, we see that we've got email is blank right now and radio is over here. So we've got the URL for radio, which is on. And this means that we still need to specify a value for it because we don't have anything that's being passed. We just see that it's actually being clicked. So maybe if we can click it and we don't click it, we don't see that anything. So none of the radio buttons got selected. So let's start by setting in some values here. So we do need to specify that the value of this. Now they can be anything that you want, and it doesn't always have to coincide, but usually best practices is that you make it coincide with the value that the user is selecting, because it really does just make the most sense. So now when I refresh it, we're going to take a look at that string again, refresh it, and now whenever I pass over, I get the value that I've added in here. And we can also add in values for the name input as well. So if we had a name, a default value that we always want to show up, or we wanted a default value for an email at email.com, we save that, and now when we refresh it, we see that they're already populated. So if we want to have our radio button already selected, we can do this as well by adding in a value called checked. So no, they're not really checkboxes, but whenever we add in checked, that just indicates that this is the radio button that already is pre-selected. Similar to radio buttons, we might have another one called, so I'm going to just copy this one out here, and we might have a checkbox here. So if you, you'll see this a lot of times, agree to terms of service or something like that, and maybe we could just call this agree and tie it into the ID, agree, transform the type to, instead of email, it's going to be checkbox. And now these are going to be different radio buttons because this is going to give us the ability to check off more than one of these. The name here again needs to be different, so it can be agree 1, and we can see that if this is checked off, maybe we could just pass over a value of 1. So we want to make sure that we have the ability to check and uncheck it, and we don't have them by the same name. With HTML5, we really did get a lot of options for inputs. So we've got everything. So we've looked at button, we've looked at checkbox. We can also look at color, date, time, and I'm going to do this within CodePen, because there's quite a lot of these, and we just want to be able to go through them fairly quickly because of course depending on what you want to do within your web page, you may or may not want to use different ones. So I'm going to just create a default type here. I'm going to call it default and give it an ID of default, and I'm going to call it HTML5 types. And this way we can change the types as needed. It's going to be over here where we've got a name for it. So I'm just going to call it new value, or maybe just shorten it. Call it NV. We can change this now to all the different types. So just take a quick look and see what they look like. So if we select input type as color, we see we get this color pop up whenever the user clicks it, allowing them to set a hexadecimal color that gets returned and held as the name field. And now if you submit that, then it's going to hold that color value. So just another one that we have is we can use date. So this one can be date. Maybe call this one default 2. And so now date pops up a window with all of the dates, and it automatically populates the dates. So it gives you the ability to kind of search through calendar entries and return back different values there. We can also add in date time. So saving that. And date and time doesn't always work across all browsers, but you do have the option to do locale, which is a date and time, and that allows you to enter in the date and time with no time zone. So we can see that we got the ability to do the date and time there as well and be more specific with that. We can also add in different types as well. So going back up here, if we want to upload a file, so if we want to have the user upload files, we can specify the type as file. So maybe I can do default 3 and give it a 3. So here the user can pick the different file types. We can also be more specific, going back to these date and times. So we could do default 4 here, and we can be specific. So if we only want to return back a month, we can do it that way as well. So maybe I can set this one to month. And we do have a lot of different options with HTML5. So we see that we can specify the month here. So we can see January 2016. We also have the ability to set, we can also change this to week, return back a week. So now we can specify and have the user click and return back that's the 38th week. We can also just do time if we want. So quite a lot of different options here. So this allows us to set the different times as well. And we can increment and decrease that, AM, PM, and so on. If we want a numeric value, we can set number. So maybe I'll just change that back to month, and maybe we want a number here. So we're looking for a specific number. This is going to be default 5, default 5, 5, and we can specify that this should be returned back as a number. So that gives us these the chevrons here to increment and decrease. We also have a URL. So this is another one that's an interesting one that can prevent a default submission. So this one has to be in a URL format or it won't accept the submission of it. So if I just type in a bunch of random characters here, we get that same pop-up here that we got with the email where we need to specify and add in a specific type of content that it's expecting. So quite a lot of options, and you can go over to Mozilla and check out all the different ones. So they have passwords, so this is one that was previously used. They also have range, so you've got some other attributes you've got to set here, a minimum and a maximum. You can set a step here, and it gives you this slider range that you can set values in between. There's also telephone numbers, so TEL, and so on. So a lot of different options here, and it's definitely worth checking out the different ways that you can get values inputted into your different types of fields. So the next lesson, we're going to look at more options for HTML forms and show you just some of the different options that you can do when it comes to HTML forms.